The gateway to the West, the 314, the Lou. St. Louis, Missouri has been called many nicknames throughout history, and the city has been so iconic and exciting for so long. I've lived in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri my entire life. I live about 20 minutes away from the city, but I definitely consider myself as being a native of St. Louis, and I've been to every single place I'm going to talk about today. There are so many great reasons why St. Louis is so iconic, but some of them are mainly being its relatively cheap cost of living, its attractions, its sightseeing, its sports teams, its food, and also its history. One of the reasons St. Louis is so iconic is due to its geography. St. Louis is in east central Missouri, and it lies at the west bank of the Mississippi River. According to Britannica, the borders and boundaries of St. Louis have not changed since 1876. Also, according to that Britannica article, the invention of the steamboat caused St. Louis to grow very rapidly and become a major port during that time. The population of St. Louis grew very rapidly between the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And St. Louis is actually Missouri's most populated metropolitan area. According to the Fox 2 News article I read, and also the U.S. Census, the population of St. Louis was just over 300,000 people as of 2020. Also stated in that Britannica article, the population of St. Louis metropolitan area, which would include areas like my town, was 2.8 million, so roughly about 3 million people. So next I'm going to talk about some of the really iconic and fun attractions and sights to see in St. Louis. The most popular attraction in St. Louis is the Gateway Arch. So the Gateway Arch is 630 feet tall, it's stainless steel, and it was designed by the architect Ario Saarinen. And it was just to commemorate the arch as being the gateway to the West, and that's what it's referred to. But the arch sits atop the Museum of Westward Expansion, which actually I used to go to on field trips when I was in middle school. And the arch is also very close to the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis and also the old courthouse, which actually my mom used to work at. St. Louis also has Forest Park, which is 1,300 acres, and it has a lot of lakes and rivers and streams and natural reserves. Also in the Forest Park, during the summer, every year they put on a Shakespeare play, and it's called Shakespeare in the Park, and it's also free to the public. And it's just a really also cool resource you can see if you're ever in St. Louis in the summer. My personal favorite place to see and go to in St. Louis is St. Louis's zoo. The zoo is actually free to the public as well. And it houses about 16,000 animals and about 500 species. Another area to explore is St. Louis's Aquarium, and that also has a very iconic Ferris wheel in it. One of my other favorite places to see and visit is the St. Louis Art Museum, and I also have been on a few field trips, and I've just grown up going to it, and it's also free to the public. The Art Museum actually sits in Forest Park as well, and it sits atop a place called Art Hill, and it has a lot of gardens and like a river around it, and it's very picturesque. It's very beautiful there. And actually, when it snows in the winter, it's a tradition to go sledding down Art Hill, and there's actually black and white photos from the early 1900s of people doing that, so it's been a tradition for over 100 years, and it's really cool and fun to do when it gets cold. Also, the St. Louis Art Museum has a lot of specific galleries and seasonal galleries and exhibits they put on every year. One they do every year in spring is called Art in Bloom, and it's actually they ask local florists and people who own flower shops in our area to pick an art piece, and it could be a painting or a sculpture, and they create a flower bouquet kind of resembling it, and it gives them exposure to their area, and they give out rewards and prizes and stuff for the top 3-4 people in it. It's very cool. It's a lot of fun to do if you're ever in that area during springtime. Also, St. Louis has the Missouri Botanical Garden, which has traditional Japanese gardens and has a lantern festival during the summer as well, which is also really fun to see. The next thing I'm going to talk about and why St. Louis is so iconic is its relatively lower cost of living. According to the Fox 2 News survey, St. Louis was ranked as being the 3rd best city in the Midwest and the 25th best city in America. According to Mike Bootler, the living expenses of St. Louis is 4% lower than the rest of the state of Missouri. Bootler also stated that St. Louis's living cost is 15% lower than the national average. Also taken from that Spacewise article, the median home price is 43% less expensive than nearby Kansas City and 30% lower than the national average. There are a lot of major industries in St. Louis, like aviation, technology, finance, healthcare. St. Louis also has some of the nation's top hospitals, so Barnes Jewish, St. Louis Children's Hospital, which I used to go to as a child, and the Missouri Baptist Medical Center. St. Louis also has some great sports teams. We have the St. Louis Cardinals, which is our baseball team, and the St. Louis Blues, which is our hockey team. There is also a lot of foods that were created in St. Louis, some of them being the gooey butter cake, which is really unhealthy, but it's very good, and toasted raviolis, which we call T-Ravs. And despite some of these perks, there are some downsides to living in St. Louis. One of them being the poverty rate is 19.6, which is very unfortunate. Also, the unemployment rate in St. Louis is 3.1%, which is also not very good. Bootler also stated that the rest of that St. Louis is only safer than 1% of America, which means 99% of America is safer than St. Louis. So there's a lot of crime, unfortunately. And also St. Louis has some extreme weather, so there are some very severe thunderstorms, and there's possibilities of tornadoes as well. St. Louis in general, I think, is a great place to live. St. Louis is a very exciting city, and many people should consider moving there or visiting there. I think St. Louis was integral to America's westward expansion, and it continues to be an incredible city with museums, attractions, great food, great sports teams, and a cheap cost of living. If you are looking for an area to move or just places to explore, I think St. Louis should definitely be on your list.